Hello everyone, welcome back to the English Web. I am Bhageshri. If a lot of you would wondering as to why I'm dressed like this, that is because I've been home from the last 4 months ever since the lockdown was imposed, and there were a lot of events and weddings to attend which got cancelled, and I just realized that it's just so important to dress for oneself and not just do it for events or for other people. A lot of people have messaged me and sent emails to me asking me how to improve upon their language. Now, as good as it is, to want to improve upon a language, I really felt the need to discuss one thing which I will be sharing right now. Just consider English to be like any other language. I know that it's a universal language, it's a window to the world, and it's nice if you know the language, but learning English should not come at the cost of frowning upon your regional languages or your native languages. Languages are closely embedded with a country's culture, and it is very important that we all take pride in our regional languages and also speak them. So do not really associate English with any kind of status symbol. English is just another language. It's nice if you know the language and learn it keeping that in mind. I think it's very important for today's generation to know that it's important for us to preserve our cultural identity, to preserve our languages. Yes, learn English, but do not become desperate to learn English. You will become fine, you will become fluent, but also know that it's just another language. And yes, learn it keeping that in mind. Please subscribe to the English Web and do not forget to click the bell icon to stay notified at all times. There are several words that are used while describing a country or that are related to a country while talking about one. And I just thought that in today's video I shall emphasize or stress on the words that are associated or are used while talking about a country. The first word is demographics. Now, this word, a lot of you may have heard about this word or would be using it, but there are many layers to this meaning. While studying demographics, statistical data of factors like age, sex or gender or income of the people residing in a community or in a country are taken into consideration. So this helps the government form policies, or it helps the government with market research. The second is psychographics. Now, psychographics is the study of personality traits, human behavior, or the human attitude. Now, that is taken into consideration to understand the approach of a human mind. When you talk about a community, the psychographics determine how the human psychology functions. So the psychographics play a very important role in determining policies or trends. Democracy is for the people, of the people, and by the people. When we talk about autocracy, we talk about absolute power in the hands of a government. So it is completely opposite to how a democracy functions. Here we focus on a government like, say, the Saudi Arabian government or the Vatican City. These are autocratic countries, and the power is contained in the hands of the government, and they function with absolute power. When we talk about dictatorship, we are talking about power that lies in the hands of a dictator or an individual as opposed to a government. So the difference between autocracy and dictatorship is that we are talking about a government while talking about autocracy, but when talking about dictatorship, we are talking about power that lies in the hands of a dictator or a sole individual. So these are two different kinds of government, and they're very different from each other. The fifth word is communism. Now, the best example of a communist government is the Chinese government. Now, how is communism different from autocracy or dictatorship or democracy for that matter? Communism also stands for collectivism. Now, most of what is owned in the country is communally owned. Everything is owned by the government, and the government distributes the resources among the people based on their needs. So things are owned communally, and people do not have any holding or ownership of the bigger entities. The sixth word is civilization. When we talk about civilization with respect to a country, we're talking about social organizations that are well in place. They're well established, well developed. It almost talks about a culture, or it's a way of life. So civilized country reflects the social organizations that function effortlessly, that reflect the country's culture, almost to the extent that it's a way of life of the country. The seventh word is secularism. When we talk about secularism with respect to India, we are talking about neutral perception or neutral participation in all religious affairs. So when we talk about India, and use the word secularism, we are talking about India's tolerance towards all the religions that are practiced in the country. So it's like, there's just neutral observance or participation in every religious affair. So it's all the communities coming together and kind of supporting every religion. So be it Hinduism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism, apart from other religions, or Buddhism for that matter. So it's like there is just the same kind of tolerance and approach towards every religion. So yes, when we talk about India, that is the meaning. And in other contexts, secularism means the separation of religious institutions from the doings of the government. So there are two different entities. Then we have first world, second world, third world countries. Now, a lot of you may have often come across these terms. First world countries are usually those countries that are aligned with the US and other Western countries. So back in the day when the US was opposed to the Soviet Union, all the countries which were allies of the US, the Western world, belonged to the first world category. So those were the first world countries. Again, a lot of them are characterized by a high standard of living. They're all developed, high per capita income, individual income. Now, the second world comprises nations that are back in the day were opposed to the Western world, that were not allies of the US and the Western world. So countries like China, the communist countries, Soviet Union, Cuba, they all belonged to the second world category. So they were opposed to the first world countries in their practices, or when it came to their characteristics. And the third world countries are those countries that neither belong to the first two groups. So not the communist group and nor the Western world. I know of a lot of people who use the word developing, while talking about India or other developing countries very casually, but there are a lot of layers, or there are a lot of characteristics of a developing nation along as well as a developed nation. Now, a developing nation is one which has a high birth rate. It has a higher incidence of poverty, like not a very high standard of living. Again, a moderately low per capita income. Per capita income is the average income of an individual. So yes, so these factors are the characteristics. These are the characteristics of a developing nation. Like India is a developing nation. A lot of these developing countries are dependent on the primary sector. So India, for example, is dependent on agriculture. So yes, that is one of the characteristics of a developing country. When you talk about developed countries, Most of the workforce is employed in either the secondary or the tertiary sector. These developed countries are also characterized by a high standard of living, by higher income levels, by lower birth rates. Uh, the incidence of poverty is also fairly low. When we talk about underdeveloped countries, we are talking about those countries whose characteristics are completely opposed to the characteristics of the developing as well as the developed nations. So again, the birth rate is very high, the death rate is very high, there's extreme poverty. A lot of African countries, for example, are underdeveloped, people die of hunger, so the basic necessities are not fulfilled, and so it's characterized by a very low standard of living. The last word is socialist or socialism. Now, again, a word that a lot of you must be familiar with. It is also known as leftism. So, a leftist or a socialist government focuses on equally distributing the resources, producing them or exchanging them, on a community level. So that is the quality of, or that is the characteristic of a socialist government. So these were some of the words that we generally use while talking about a country. Again, there are a lot of words, but these are some of the words that are very frequently used, and they almost characterize a lot of countries. Some of them are used to describe a country, some of them are used to study the landscape of a country. Again, very important concepts and terms, and I believe everybody should be aware of these terms or words in today's day and age, when the political situation is quite intense. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and let me know if you all have any more words to share with respect or while talking about a country, and leave them in the comments below. And yes, do not forget to hit the like button. I shall see you guys soon. Goodbye.